And the question around it was whether or not it is indeed incidents of xenophobia or perceived xenophobia. And we'll remind you that the theme for Africa Day is that of refugees, returnees, internally displaced persons towards solutions, and to forget displacement, or rather move forward with the displacement of people. So as we observe this month, Africa Month, we discuss the issue of xenophobia with Brian Kagoro, a Pan Africanist lawyer who is here with us, Acting Director, General Department of Home Affairs, Thulani Mavuso is on the line with us. Prince Debo Adesina, founder of the Nigerian Lives Matter organization, here with us in studio. Welcome to you all, and thank you so much for taking the time to speak to us.
Thank you.
Perhaps let me just start with you, Mr. Kagoro. As I said, so there's the issue of what some say is perceived xenophobia, because some have said it's criminality, and we'll get Mr. Mavuso to talk about it. Is it or isn't it?
I think that it is Afrophobia, whether actuated, driven by criminality, or driven by genuine social grievance. It really, the definition is simply tinkering with very minor details.
How minor are they? Because as you say, you are qualifying it, saying it's Afrophobia, and there are those who've said, well, you know, we're looking at semantics here, but I would imagine on African Month those are very important.
Yep. So the recurrent, since 2008, there have been these recurrent episodes where the attacks do not cover nationals here in South Africa. When they target, they seem to target not Europeans of foreign origin, not Chinese of foreign origin, not Asians of foreign origin, but Africans. And that is not xenophobia. Xenophobia would be the indiscriminate targeting of all persons of foreign descent, but this is specific targeting of persons of African descent, and it ought to be appropriately classified as Afrophobia, which is the hatred of self, the hatred of people who are black like yourself.
Is that how you see it, Mr. Adesina?
Well, very close to his explanation around the attacks. Actually, since we've been observing, watching it closely, we say some few South Africans fail to understand that the brothers from the other part of the continent coming to South Africa is not like they really want to come and stay in South Africa. Some issues have led to some of these people to visit South Africa. But along the line, they try to pour out their angers on foreign nationals, most especially from the continent, and it makes it
and we'll get into the why and diagnosing of the problem in just a moment, but it is important for me to raise this. There are South African communities who say they are up to their ears in crime brought on by foreign nationals. Nigerians particularly have been fingered as being behind that crime, whether it's prostitution, drugs, killings. Your response to that?
No, actually, I've had series of discussions around this, and I want to, different from trying to stereotype Nigeria, and that is one of the reasons my movement, Nigerian Lives Matter, came up into existence, because we see it as an opportunity for us to really tell the world that we are not drug dealers, we are not into all this. There's some few elements that we cannot practically...
So there's an admission that there are incidents which obviously do not color all Nigerians and generally foreign nationals. Let me find out from you, Mr. Mavuso, what is the South African government saying? Because part of the criticism has been you cannot deal with the problem if you misdiagnose it. So some have said you just merely calling it criminality and seeing it as a battle of resources is part of the problem. What's your response to that?
Well, good evening, and good evening to the viewers. Well, let me first begin by saying that we of the view that South Africans have over the years lived with foreign nationals, whether during the period of apartheid, when there were a lot of Malawians, Zambians, and some of the Lesotho people who were working in South African mines, and also more integrated in our communities. Now, the problem began here when South Africa created certain legal instruments which were meant to be able to protect, for an example, people who are being persecuted from the countries of origin for various reasons. And we created an asylum seeker regime. Now, the asylum seeker regime is meant to protect a person who is from their country of origin and come to South Africa to apply for asylum. And in that regard, the person is given a permit to remain in the Republic until their status is determined. What then happened is that you had the economic migrants who then decided that they would abuse that particular regime, which was not meant for them, because asylum is not meant for economic migrants. So that's the one part. The second part to it is that there are people who disregard our laws and remain in the Republic illegally. I think those colleagues in the studio, they are alluding to some of the issues relating to Afrophobia. But the reality is that we have a lot of African brothers from the continent who, because we have waived the visa requirement to say a person can remain in the Republic for 90 days or for 30 days without a visa, and that is now extended to people are overstaying. That is what I think causes problem in our society, and it's something that we need to say, let's respect the rules of the Republic. If you want to remain longer, you then have to apply for an appropriate
So which
visa.
is it? Is it criminality, or are there incidents of xenophobia or Afrophobia? Because I think it's important to get the definition right. Again, I'll go back to the fact that there are those who criticize the government saying, you've come up with so many platforms to deal with this issue and you're not getting it right because of how you are framing the problem.
Yes, but I'm trying to get to the point. So in reality is that because of the contestation around resources, there's always a view from South Africans that actually government seem to be favoring foreign nationals over South Africans by allowing, for an example, people to operate businesses who are asylum seekers. But remember, there was a case of Washanuka who came from Zimbabwe as an asylum seeker. Then the court said you must allow the asylum seeker to work, study, and operate a business. And then there was this booming, applications for asylum. And then people that started operating businesses. That on its own created a situation where South Africans felt that, they are being displaced in their own country. This is one issue.
Okay, let me allow
element that comes in.
Let me allow Mr. Kagoro to come in here. You look a bit exasperated.
I'm a bit surprised. The West Africa, ECOWAS has had freedom of movement, right of residence, and right of establishment since 1975. Even at the time when Nigerian economy was doing very well.
Fantastic.
Up to now. Nigeria doesn't have that problem that we're describing as laws on asylum. We are not seeing the same xenophobic attacks or Afrophobic attacks in their intensity in Kenya and elsewhere. The history of this country, colleagues, is that the apartheid regime took away 3 fundamental rights, amongst many others. The one was freedom of movement of black people in this country, right? There's the right to move around in the country and especially in urban areas. And one of the fundamental things that was taken away was this ability to get to learn and know each other. So we became socially immobile and economically immobile. Capital from South Africa earns a lot more in Nigeria, in Zimbabwe, in Mozambique, in all these countries where we say we have a social problem coming from, than it does in this country.
But wasn't the South African government, and allow me to jump in, cognizant of that when they stated in their constitution, and that includes foreigners as well, that the country belongs to all who live in it. It includes freedom of... So what I'm asking is, what is lacking? The constitutionalism aspect of it, including that of recognizing foreigners.
In all fairness, irregular migration, doesn't matter where it happens, irregular migration causes a strain on resources. And no country can carry an infinite number of irregular migrants. But irregular migration is not what we're complaining about. It's not even criminality of foreigners that's a source. So some of the people who've been attacked, the Somali business folk, unless if there's proof from South African police service that those Somalis were engaged in criminal activity, you would seem that the majority of cases, if you take from 2008 up to date, where those foreigners, no matter what regime they'd come into the country for, were actually contributing a service.
I'm going to ask you to go on to your other 2 points because I jumped to just to truncate the point that you're making. So the other 2 points that you're making of why we're here.
So the reason why we're here is the continent is moving towards economic integration. It's moving towards political and social integration. I'll tell you what, if we as black people across the continent don't think carefully about this, is that we're going to engage in this little almost Bantustan mentality. We don't want South Africans in Zimbabwe, we don't want Zimbabweans in South Africa, we don't want Nigerians elsewhere. But what this country has been describing as white monopoly capital or whatever is moving around and across this continent without limitation. Tourists who are coming from Europe and elsewhere can move around, commit bigger crimes in this country or in any other country and not be. So my sense is, let's deal with irregular migration by dealing with policies that govern migration without becoming, even as officials, reductionist in our diagnosis of what the problem is.
So let me come to you, Mr. Adesina. So you would find South Africans who lived in exile, and I'm not really conflating the two and saying they're the same, and of course you can jump in, but they'd say that life in foreign countries was pretty much the same as they're experiencing here. Feelings that imbued hostility, that bubbled over when they were put in camps. As much as they were accepted as members of the community, they felt that they weren't. Do you think there's a case to make?
I totally disagree, because I can practically tell you, when I was growing up in Nigeria, I practically lived with some foreign nationals, mostly South Africans. I can easily tell you, I have a woman of 85 years old that has been living in Nigeria even before Nigeria got independent, married to a Nigerian, a Xhosa woman. And in fact, we practically embraced them open doors policy. We married to South Africa. And I always say it, whether South Africa like it or not, we are here to stay.
So what is the problem? The
problem is the government of South Africa failed to really understand the issue around how they can manage foreign nationals. Number one, the locals here, some of them are not properly educated. The history has not been properly told. They fail to understand that the more the people of the same color, mostly the blacks, comes together, we'll be able to get it right. And the fact of the matter that the government failed to pick the issue around the xenophobia by, service delivery, all this area, hanging on the criminality. We know criminality does not have color, does not have face. Every part of the world we have criminals. Even in Nigeria, we have kidnappers. In fact, it's more like a franchise. But that does not stop even the Nigerian to take law into their hands.
So you believe that criminality is a manifestation of xenophobia?
No. When we use the word xenophobia, we know it's hatred towards some set of people. The criminality act of it, will I ask you to take law into your hands by killing somebody? A Nigerian was burnt alive, and the police were looking at him.
Mr. Mavuso, you've heard the arguments from your colleagues here. I want to point you to a statement made by Judge Mojapelo, one of the Constitutional Court judges, who has said the problem in this country is that xenophobia itself has not been outlawed. And as I mentioned earlier on, there are those who say the arguments are steeped in politics, they're steeped in perception. But he's saying there is a legal framework, but the problem is that it concentrates on other things, such as robbery, theft, assault, defamation, etc. What is your response to that?
So again, when I started, I indicated that, South Africans have lived with foreign nationals and in a more peaceful and harmonious way. I mean, since I was a child, I lived with a number of foreign nationals in this country, and we continue to do so. The biggest problem that we have is that when people come into a country, they then want to organize them in a group, in a society.
Mr. Mavuso, Mr. Kagoro here is saying...
I cannot be a foreigner in Africa. Can we refer to each other as fellow Africans? Because in the enterprise of liberating our countries, we had that solidarity. The minute we use colonial borders to make each other foreigners, then we're buying into the whole colonial discourse.
Yes.
Well, let me continue then. So what I'm saying is that you don't want to have a situation where people want to organize themselves in a particular group. That is why South Africa never had a policy of creating camps. We're saying that people must integrate and create, within communities and create the spirit of, communities and live with each other in harmony. Now, you then have a situation where people want to organize themselves as the Somalian group, the Nigerian group, and the whatever. And that's something that, is foreign to us, because we believe that if you are a human being, you come into a country, you are legal in a country, you actually have...
But are they treated as such? Does the system treat them as such? Because more important...
Yes,
and also, if you are under threat,
Okay, let me tell you, some of my best friends are Nigerians. Some of my best friends are Zimbabweans. And I can tell you that not only me and many other people are close. My best man when I got married was a Nigerian guy.
But are you not drawing a distinction where you're saying you're not drawing a distinction?
No. Can I jump in? I have a lot of white folk who I have told they were racist, and they told me they had a black friend.
No.
So I know, but the point I want to ask you, sir, as you finish your point, is simple. If you feel your identity is threatened because you belong to a particular group or nationality, you band it together. If you feel the law will protect you irrespective of your identity, you will integrate.
Mr. Mavuso?
No, I think this is where the problem that people want to organize themselves in groups where they come from. I'm saying that you have come to South Africa legally, you are now integrating communities and ensure that you are part and parcel of the South African community. But if you want to identify yourself as a Nigerian, as a Somalian, this is where the problem starts.
I want to...
it's important that we do that. The second thing is that we need to deal with the issue relating to irregular migration, because that's what causes problem for all other people. Because when people see that they know that they actually they can't illegal, then they begin to say, why are our laws not being respected? Because people are deliberately actually disrespecting our laws. So there's a challenge that we need to work together as a collective to say, any person in this country must be properly documented, must ensure that they respect our laws. A person who's persecuted from their country, we know for a fact that people are here because they are persecuted because of sexual orientation, because of their political view.
Okay.
We protect those people as a country.
All right, so Mr. Adesina, yes, you want?
Yeah, I want to really jump into it. The acting DG seem not to really understand the word groupings. Because I believe when you use the word groupings, definitely when we arrive here, we arrive with a passport. I'm an economical migrant. And when I came to this country, I did not come with South African passport. I came in with Nigerian passport. Maybe after some time, I became South African naturalization. Gave me the face to be a South African. But what I want to say when it comes about grouping, we're talking about grouping. Are you referring to the food we eat? Because definitely Nigerian man eats a goosey soup. We go to the market and get it. And this is where I believe, if you are talking about groupings, are you talking about groupings to gang up against South African, or grouping to gang up for us to show our, in order for you people to get into that and to celebrate our culture?
Okay.
So what groupings is it talking about?
So I want to talk about the legal instruments, and I want to point to some of those that South Africa has implemented. And this is, we mentioned the theme of Africa Month, which is pretty much Africa Year. So legislation which deals with the Promotion of Equality, Prevention of Unfair Discrimination, Act 4 of 2000, Refugees Act 130 of 1998, the Protection from Harassment Act of 2011, Immigration Act of 2002. Are they not functional, Mr. Kagoro? Are they inappropriate?
The bulk are not. I have felt, because I push back as a Pan-Africanist, I've sometimes felt immigration officers, I felt even state officials, police officers, almost speak in a very condescending, like, what are you doing here, a tone each time I've been here, and I've pushed back. Let me tell you the problem. The problem is not the law. The problem is there are many people who are not South Africans who are here. A small percentage of those people may engage in crime. There are many South Africans who live here for whom the post-apartheid state has not been able to deliver service and the quality of life they expect. The scapegoating of foreigners arises out, not foreigners, Africans, arises out of the sense that
What do you think, by the way, it's Africans? Because I want to go back to those who don't understand the distinction between Afrophobia and xenophobia. Why are they easy pickings?
You know,
because we live in the same community.
The preconditioning of the apartheid state and the history of racism was to make you hate the thing you feared the most is that which the master told you you ought to fear. That's why when a white person, no matter how crooked and criminal they are, walks into a shop, nobody panics. If I walk in, immediately they see a criminal. And it's deeply embedded in our psyche. And now, let's not oversimplify. I agree with Mr. Mavuso. Let's deal with irregular migration. As we're doing so, let's also address the broader question of how to govern migration so that we create a space where people who are honest, hardworking, are not subjected to the sort of attacks, burning, necklacing, and so that we've seen. Because self-help, when the law is taken into account, because it's not happened once, it's happened several times. And I want to salute all those South Africans who stood in solidarity with the rest of the African brothers and sisters saying, no, this is not what South African values are. It's not even what the law and the Constitution is. The very fact that there's been a gap between what the official explanation of that Afrophobia is and the decisive action required is that literally, unless if a dialogue happens between the different communities, you're going to have in the medium to long term retaliatory acts. People saying, okay, we can't come, we can't be safe in the country, your businesses can't be safe. We don't want that in Africa because it doesn't affect Nigerians and Somalis and South Africans. It affects all Africans. It keeps us out of the economy of this world and the economy of the continent.
Mr. Mavuso, I still need to hammer on this because recently when the DIRCO Minister Lindiwe Sisulu held a meeting with the ambassadors of other countries, the issue was raised of statements made by the Deputy Police Minister about Hillbrow and its occupation and how this is going to impact on South Africa in general. I know I can't ask you to respond on behalf of another politician, but it's also been done in a study by the Institute for Security Studies, which found that more than 54% of South Africans said they don't trust foreign nationals. So is there something inane in South Africans, in the manner in which we've been governed, that lends us to some of these adverse feelings or thoughts?
Well, I would not speak, obviously, as you said, on behalf of somebody or either respond maybe to some of the views that are expressed by South Africans individually. But my own view is that obviously in South Africa post-1994, there was a huge movement to the south, and obviously people had to actually deal with the new phenomenon regarding integration. And I think people have done very well, but I think, as I said, and I remain saying the same thing, is that the two things that frustrate, South Africans, which as government we have to deal with, is one, is when you have people who are undocumented in the country, and the Department of Home Affairs, we are trying our best to ensure that we get people who are undocumented in the country and deport them so that they can come back regularly. We have eased the what they call the visa regime in the SADC region, for an example, where the people in the SADC region don't need a visa to come to South Africa. They come for a period of time and then return home. That's the one point. The second point is this issue regarding the abuse of the asylum seeker system, which was meant to protect. I mean, in 2007, we received over 200 applications for asylum. In reality, is that it was because of economic meltdown within the continent. So those are the issues, particularly in Zimbabwe, but those are the issues that we have to deal with. All I'm saying is that South Africans continue and they are amenable to live with any person, whether they are...
Okay. I need to jump in here, Mr. Mavuso, and ask this question. What responsibility does the state take? There were examples that were used. Mido Masia, there was Emmanuel Sitole, the Mozambican. There was, Mr. Kagoro mentioned the appellants within the Somalis to citizens in in Abdi Another versus the Minister of Home Affairs. I know a lot of foreign nationals say they are targeted by police, whether on the streets or going about their own business, and institutionally. So what responsibility does the South African government carry for some of these atrocities or unfairness?
Well, if a South African has committed a crime, attacking a foreign national, we have to prosecute that particular person because they have no right to take the law in their own hands. First of all, if somebody that we know that they're committing criminal activities, they're either undocumented, they can't report them to the authorities. That's the one point. The second part is that in the instance where, for example, there are foreign nationals that are either, have been attacked for reasons that are xenophobic in nature, again, we need to be able to come in and ensure that we assist those people because no one has the right to take the law in their own hands.
Okay. Mr. Adesina, I know you want to object to that, but
I'm very sad because there's something I want to quickly chip in. The Home Affairs continuously shifting the goalposts. In 2014, they made a law of immigration to be more tightened. There are a lot of let me say there are a lot of Nigerians that were legal in the country before 2014. Immediately they brought the new law that says when your document expires, even I can tell you more than 50 Nigerians have been recorded by HORS, Nigerian Lives Matter, with 4 or 5 children, and they're illegal, but they were one-time legal. But because maybe one way or the other they failed to renew their documents, or the institutional xenophobia has been practically placed underneath in the Home Affairs, that once they see a Nigerian passport application, they even call Nigerian police clearance from Nigeria fake when they've not even done proper investigation. How do they manage to get it? I can bring a lot of cases to the acting DG in order for him to correct himself and put things together.
Okay.
They are doing
I hope
something
we'll continue that
similar.
discussion.
I know that they ate Nigerians
Kagoro,
and they are doing something against that.
Mr. Kagoro, I need to ask you, because as much as Nigerians' lives matter, so do South African lives. How do we create that social cohesion where we're all in one place?
That's a perfect question, because the issue is my sense. I always look at things using Pan-African lens. Africans remain the poorest generally, and in particular the wealth of South Africa is not harvested by the majority in this country. We cannot solve the inequality problem in South Africa by scapegoating non-South African Africans. I think we have to deal with the deeper structural issues, the direction of travel in terms of economic policy, the direction of travel in terms of government curbing corruption, government addressing excesses of some of the political and economic elite. That's one. But number two, I think all of us who are not South Africans understand this, that we cannot have the lion's share that citizens
and
are
that's where I'm afraid we're going to have to leave it. We've run out of time. Thank you very much. Brian Kagoro, Pan Africanist Lawyer. Thulani Mavuso, who is on the line with us, the Acting Director General at the Department of Home Affairs. And thank you very much to Prince Debo Adesina, founder of Nigerian Lives Matter. This has been On the Record.